everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you to Europe on Access webinar, Learning to Change, the role of educational institutions in fostering accessibility for disabled artists and culture professionals in Europe. We are here today to present the final report on accessible cultural education, and we are very happy to do it today, which is the International Day of People with Disability. My name is Aristide Rontini, and I'm super excited to be here together with Maria Vlahu, moderating the webinar. Before introducing ourselves, we are going to give you some information on the accessibility of the event. The International Sign Interpretation is going to be spotlighted on your screen all the time. There is also English and Spanish translations, so you can select your favorite language setup. You have to click the interpretation icon globe to select it. A short note, on smaller screen size and windows, you might have to go on the lower part of your screen and click the more three dots icon, then click interpretation. To access captions, translated captions, use the link sent in the invitation and also now paste in the chat function. Captions are in English and you can choose an AI translation into other languages for captions in the drop-down list. Please, if you have any issues with accessing this, use the chat function. The tech manager will support you. And now we are ready to present ourselves. My name again is Aristide Rontini. I am an independent disabled artist based in Italy. My pronouns are he, him. Today I have short hair, I have a beard, I wear large black glasses, and today I'm wearing a black sweatshirt. Now I can pass to Maria. Welcome, Maria, again.
Thank you, Aristide. I'm equally excited to be here today. I'm Maria Vlahu, the Executive Director of Acesso Cultura, Access Culture, an association based in Portugal. I'm a white woman, straight, light brown hair, green eyes. I'm wearing a green sweater, and my pronouns are she, her. Up to you, Aristide.
Hi again. Why we are here again? Skånes Dansteater commissioned on the move to develop a research process and publication on the access and lack of access to European higher education in the performing arts for deaf and disabled students. Today, we will have the opportunity to get to know and to discuss the result of these studies. What is EBA? EBA. Skånes Dansteater is one of the partners of Europe Beyond Access, and Europe Beyond Access is the creation of new works by deaf and disabled artists from across Europe. It involves 10 European dance and performing art organizations and has received co-funding from the European Commission. EBA is the biggest transnational project in the world supporting disabled and deaf artists to break the glass ceiling of contemporary dance and theater and to become Europe's next artistic leaders. You can find more information on EBA website at europebeyondaccess.com.
Thank you, Aristide. Maybe also a note regarding the terminology we will be using. The terms are different in each country, even in English, which will be our common language today, spoken language today. There are people who identify as disabled people, other people who identify as people with disabilities. So contributors today, including ourselves, we will be using the term that is most common in our national contexts. And a couple of words regarding the structure of this webinar today. So in the first part, we'll have the presentation of the report by On the Move, which was the organization that was commissioned to conduct the research. There will be a Q&A with Aristide and myself. And then we'll have a panel discussion with disabled artists and Europe Beyond Access to hear their considerations from their perspective of the disabled art community and programmers in the dance field. After this part, we'll have a 5-minute break, And then we're going to hear from a policymaker, their response to the report, and we'll have a panel discussion on education and training routes. And after that, in about 2 hours' time, we will conclude. Aristide, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria. Now we are very excited now to be able to hear the result of the report, and I'm very happy to welcome the two independent researchers, Konrad Wolf and Jordi Balta, on the behalf of On the Move. Just a few words about On the Move. On the Move is an international information and advocacy network for the mobility of artists and cultural professionals. The network is co-funded by the European Union. Beyond facilitating access to funding and administrative questions, On the Move advocates for a fairer and more sustainable cultural mobility. This research is the third one commissioned to On the Move under the EBA project. Hi, Conrad and Jordi. Welcome again. Before we start with the presentation, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourselves by one, and I kindly ask you to share with us your name, where you are based, your pronoun, a short description of your professional profile, and also give us a short self-description of yourself. You can start, Connor, and Jordi can follow.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
My name is Konrad Wolf. I'm based in Germany. I'm German and I'm using the pronouns he and him. I'm a cultural worker. I mostly work as a consultant, as a lecturer, focusing on anti-ableist working practices in the performing arts. I'm a white person with medium-length brown hair. I'm in my early 30s and I identify as disabled.
Hi, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jordi Balta. I use the pronouns he, him. I work as a freelance consultant and researcher in the fields of cultural policy, sustainability, and international relations. And I was part of the On the Move research team for this report. I'm a white man in my late 40s. I have gray hair and I wear glasses and a black top today, or dark top today. And I'm very pleased to be here and to be introducing the Learning to Change report, which we will be presenting in the next few minutes. And we have a PowerPoint presentation to highlight some of the main elements of the research. So as it has been said, Learning to Change has been conducted in the context of the Europe Beyond Access project, and it has been coordinated by the On the Move network. We can move to the next slide, which explains the scope of the research. Learning to Change has analyzed the accessibility barriers faced by disabled people in higher education institutions in the performing arts, covering the countries that take part in the Creative Europe program of the European Union, as well as the United Kingdom. In addition to analyzing accessibility barriers in these kind of institutions, we've also examined what is the impact of that in the professional careers of disabled people who would like to have a career in the performing arts, what alternative career routes can exist for these people, and what measures can be adopted to improve accessibility. It's important to note by higher education institutions in the performing arts, we include, for instance, theater schools, dance academies, conservatories, universities, and similar institutions. And when we say disabled people, we mean disabled, chronically ill, neurodivergent, and deaf people, particularly those that are or would like to have a career in the performing arts, either as artists or as other professional profiles in the performing arts. This research has been conducted for 1 year, between September 2024 and August 2025, and it has involved different methodologies, including 3 online surveys addressed respectively to disabled artists and cultural professionals, to higher education institutions, and to performing arts organizations. It has also involved a range of in-depth interviews with different people in these sectors, a number of focus groups, as well as some consultation meetings to present the preliminary results. There has also been an advisory research group established by European Access to accompany the research. And we've also analyzed existing literature in this field. And indeed, the report builds on the research reports that were conducted during the previous phase of European Access. We can now move to the next slide to recognize that this report has some limitations. One of them is that of the voices that have not been included, because we are aware that there's a number of disabled people who would have liked to study performing arts in higher education institutions, and because of the barriers they encountered, they had to follow other careers, and some of them never then access the professional performing arts. Those voices have not been included. It was not possible, and it's also not possible for us to estimate the size of this group. The second potential bias that exists is the fact that we are aware that the institutions that have been more active in improving their accessibility are also more likely to have responded to the survey. So it could be that the figures and the data we are presenting has some bias, which is positive for those that have been actively engaged in this field. Over to Konrad for the next section.
The landscape of exclusion, the lived experience of disabled students. So in the next couple of minutes, I will talk about the experience of disabled students, and this experience has started long before they begin to study. It starts with the so-called entry barriers, the first line of exclusion to performing arts education. I want to give you some numbers. We found out that only 27% of surveyed training institutions provide information to prospective students in accessible formats such as Braille, audio versions, easy-to-read versions, or sign language videos. Only 41% of surveyed training institutions provide descriptions of their level of accessibility on websites. And mere 31% of surveyed training institutions have established adapted entry requirements for disabled applicants. When we look at these numbers, it is really important to keep in mind what my colleague Jordi said at the beginning. The higher education institutions surveyed are likely to be among the most engaged with the issue of accessibility. Therefore, it is likely that entry barriers to higher performing arts education are even higher than suggested by these figures. It is important to emphasize the fact that a disabled person has managed to successfully navigate entry barriers does not mean that their educational experience will be accessible or inclusive. The entry test is just the first of many barriers, as illustrated by the following quote from a respondent to the questionnaire for disabled artists and performing arts professionals. Now I'm reading the quote. While the institution seems very open at first, in terms of access for disabled students and awarding diplomas, when facing the design of schedules and training activities, I felt extremely lonely, placed in situations which could have been dangerous if I had not listened to my body. The educational experience of disabled students in the performing arts field is one of systematic inadequacy. less than 20% of disabled graduates rated the teacher's knowledge of accessibility as good or excellent. Only 30% showed lecturers and trainees demonstrated good or excellent understanding of disability arts. Only 11% of graduates reported having disabled teachers during their studies, meaning that most disabled students encounter exclusively non-disabled faculty without any role models. Only 17% of graduates remember being asked about their access needs while they attended a higher education institution. And the majority of graduates, 57%, and current students say that no adaptations were made to meet the requirements or needs. And in particular, this last number, that the majority of graduates and current students had no adaptations at all, shows that the majority of institutions still have an individual model, an individual understanding of disability in place, where the disabled individual carries all the responsibility to adapt to the non-disabled standards of the institution. Inclusion would mean the opposite. The training institutions would adapt to the needs of students. And as part of our questionnaire for the disabled artists and cultural professionals, we asked current and former disabled students to evaluate their educational experience across 9 accessibility dimensions using a 1 to 10 scale, 0 to 10 scale, where 0 is very bad and 10 is excellent. To give you some examples of these 9 accessibility dimensions, we didn't put all of them on the slide. Understanding, adaptability, and openness by teachers, receiving a 5.87, communication, receiving a 5.37, curriculum and teaching methods, receiving a 5.17, timetables means time and break arrangements, receiving 4.94, and building facilities receiving 4.67. These are 5 of our 9 accessibility dimensions, and it's super important to underline that none of the in total 9 accessibility dimensions we asked for achieved a rating of even 6 out of 10. As these numbers illustrate, disabled students at higher performing arts education institutions encounter numerous barriers in various areas and at different levels. These include physical and architectural barriers, communication barriers, and structural barriers. The highest rated aspect was understanding, adaptability, and openness by teachers with 5.87. That highlights that accessibility depends too much on the goodwill of some individual teachers rather than on an institutional responsibility with clear procedures and accountability. And for the next part of the presentation, I will hand over to Jordi again.
Thanks, Konrad. Yeah, so one of the findings of the report concerns the gap or the distance that exists between the statements made by institutions and the effective practice that exists on the ground. And we will show some data to illustrate these. What we found is that when we asked higher education institutions if their statutes or their strategic goals included objectives related to access, inclusion, or diversity, 81% said that they did. But then when we asked for more evidence on these, sometimes, along with very positive examples, which also exist. Sometimes and frequently we found that the statements tended to be a bit vague. Things like the university guarantees access to all students, which is a good statement, but then you also need to show how you make that effective in practice. And then when we further asked, we found that 86% of the institutions recognize that they need to make their programs and activities still more accessible. So what that also means is that, let's say, only 1 in 7 institutions would be happy with the degree of accessibility they currently have. We also asked institutions about the kind of facilities they had and the kind of schemes for accessibility that they managed. And what we found was that less than 50% of institutions in the higher education performing arts have step-free access from the street to all the facilities in their buildings. Only 34% of those institutions provide accessibility workshops and training for their staff and faculty. So that's 1 out of 3. And only 27% of those institutions have established protocols or guides to address the needs of disabled students. And we'll move now to the next slide, which emphasizes the importance of having dedicated staff as well as having specific knowledge to improve accessibility. About 3/4 of the institutions, so 74% of the institutions, say that they have someone in their staff who is responsible for accessibility and inclusion. However, along again with some good examples, and we will tell more about that later in the discussion, we also found that very often the people that are in charge of these issues have much broader remits, and they might actually dedicate very little of their time to issues of accessibility. And when we ask both institutions and current or past students, we realize that everyone recognizes that there is a need for more specific knowledge on how to make institutions more accessible. We also found that very few institutions have data on disabled applicants, disabled graduates, and disabled staff members. And of course, if you don't have the data, it's more difficult to actually take action to improve your accessibility and to evaluate the progress you have made. And this importance of data and knowledge is something that confirms some of the findings we had found in the Time to Act reports that we conducted during the previous phase of Europe Beyond Access. And it's over now to Konrad for the next and final section.
Thank you, Johnny. Konrad speaking again. Professional consequences, the career impact of educational exclusion. We found out that there is a clear connection between educational access and career outcomes. 49% of disabled artists who graduated from a higher education institution participated in over 15 professional productions, compared to only 24% of disabled artists who did not attend an institution. And 29% of non-graduates had fewer than 5 professional opportunities compared to 16 of graduates. Also, the surveyed professionals working in performing arts organization thinks that not attending an educational institution has a strong impact on disabled artists, on the career of disabled artists. In particular, in the areas professional opportunities rated with 76.5%, networking with professionals rated with 67.2%, and socioeconomic status rated with 64.6%. So there is a strong impact on the career of disabled artists, and that is also in line with the answers from disabled artists and cultural professionals who did attend a higher education institution, because they emphasized that formal education had given them professional recognition. What is missing when you depend on alternative training routes. Alternative training routes can, of course, also have benefits, but they don't have this professional recognition. They don't end with a certificate. And the answers are, for example, that institutional education helped to be considered more professional, that it gave a confidence and a so-called stamp of approval, as well as connections and pathways to the industry. And it gave disabled artists credibility. Primarily, it has given me legitimacy, is one of the quotes. So now I want to thank you for your attention in the name of the whole research team, Jordi and me, but also in the name of our colleagues, Sophie and Marie. Thank you for your attention. Now I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing the result of the report in such a clear way. It pictures clearly the barriers that disabled people experience in assessing educational art institution. Now I'm very glad to move on with the QA section that we're gonna moderate together. I'm gonna moderate together with Maria, and so we will be able to dig into some aspect of the report together with Jordi and Conrad. And I would love to start with Conrad. So my first question for you is, what are the attitudinal prejudice, preconception that prevent higher education institution from actively initiating change within the institution?
Yes, based on our research, I would say that a very dominant prejudice is that low numbers of disabled applicants are evidence for accessibility improvements not being necessary. However, the research suggests quite the opposite. As I mentioned in our presentation, there are many entry barriers still in place that prevent disabled people from applying for performing arts education. This means that accessibility improvements are necessary to increase the number of disabled applicants. When you don't offer an accessible entry test, you cannot expect disabled people to apply. The majority of disabled artists and cultural professionals surveyed who considered enrolling in performing arts education but did not do so in the end were prevented by the perception or realization that institutions were not accessible or would even reject them. Low numbers of disabled applicants are not evidence that accessibility improvements are unnecessary, but rather that the entry tests need to become more accessible. Another prejudice, at least at some institutions, might be the belief that there is no market for disabled artists. Some artists involved in the research reported being told by higher education institutions or representatives of those that there was no chance that they would ever become artists. That is far from true. As the research shows, there are jobs and opportunities for disabled artists and cultural workers. 75% of surveyed cultural organizations view lack of educational access as a problem requiring sector-wide action and systematic change. Another prejudice I want to highlight is the belief that all disabilities are visible. It is important to underline that not all disabilities are visible. And it is also important to underline that also people with so-called invisible disabilities have access needs. The research reveals particular challenges faced by students with invisible disabilities. These students often encounter disbelief, minimization, and accusation of laziness from faculty members who lack understanding of non-visible disabilities. And the last preconception I want to share is the belief that performance bodies should be neutral. A phenomenon scholar Carrie Sandel coined as tyranny of neutral. This belief that performance bodies should be without distinctive characteristics, and answers to our surveys show that unfortunately this tyranny of neutral is still in place, at least in some institutions. Respondents to the surveys for disabled artists and cultural workers report of faculty members telling them that their disability would distract the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for outlining such clear points and that I really feel tuned in with. The last question for you, and please to keep it. What are the evident contradictions in between the higher education perspective and disabled students' perspective? So how they friction, they match?
There's definitely friction, and because of time, I want to focus on one example that makes it very evident. 75% of surveyed training institutions answered that applicants and/or students have the possibility to communicate their access needs to the teachers and the institution. Meanwhile, less than 20% of graduates remember being asked about their access needs. That means that the majority of training institutions we surveyed thinks that they would create spaces to communicate access needs without actually doing so. I think that is important. I think it is important that students are actively invited to share access needs. For example, it should become a practice that classes start with access check-ins where everyone has the opportunity to share eventual access needs. Teachers should ask students, what do you need to participate in the class accessibly? And not only one time, but every week, every day. And teachers should not only ask this question, but be willing and really open to a disruption of the non-disabled standards.
Thank you again, Konrad. Thank you so much. I pass the word to Maria for the next QA section. Thank you again.
Thank you, Konrad. Jordi, I will insist a bit on the contradictions. We know that all too often there is a huge distance between theory and practice. And what would you say are the most evident contradictions between the universities, the institutions' written commitments and the effective action?
Yeah, thanks for this. So, as we explained earlier, a very large majority of the institutions have statutes or goals that refer to access and diversity and inclusion. And actually, also in many countries, there is legislation or there is policy that requires public institutions to be fully accessible. Although it's also true that this does not exist in all the countries, and that's also something that the research points out. But of course, one of the ways to make that effective is to have dedicated budgets for accessibility, because we have a starting point that frequently is not accessible. So then you need resources to make your spaces and your programs accessible. However, we found that only 29% of the institutions have dedicated budgets for accessibility, and almost 40% don't have such dedicated budgets. There's still approximately 30% of the institutions that said that they did not have a dedicated budget, but that occasionally they had used other resources to improve accessibility. But of course, that means that it could only be sporadically and not always respond to the effective needs. Some institutions also said that although they did have a budget for diversity and inclusion, these tended to be dedicated more to other dimensions of diversity and inclusion, so aspects like gender equality or ethnic diversity, rather than accessibility and disability. And actually, one respondent said that accessibility in terms of disability is very out of the picture for them. So this is something that they had not really fully considered. And this echoes many of the findings of the report. At the same time, again, it's worth underlining that for the institutions that do have a dedicated budget or that have dedicated resources to these, in recent years, they also explained how they had improved accessibility in their buildings, improved their sensory accessibility, made more accessible websites, or provided some training or hired consultancy services to improve their accessibility. So there are some positive steps, but this remains only a small part of the picture.
Exactly. And after today, we'll make it a big part, I'm sure. That's a big, my next question might be big, but could you briefly tell us what are your main recommendations for higher art education institutions?
Yes, indeed. And I think it's also important to stress, and that's one of the messages coming from the report, and we invite you to read the report, that the research shows that transformation of institutions is not only a requirement, it's not only necessary, but actually it is possible. And we do have some examples of good practice of institutions that have taken steps to improve their accessibility. This happens more frequently when there is a leadership commitment, so say from the direction or the leadership of the organization, there is a clear commitment to make an institution accessible. And as a result of that, accessibility is embedded structurally across the institution, and there's clear responsibilities and clear procedures for this to happen. In some cases, it also happens when institutions are willing to experiment with flexible approaches to their traditional educational requirements. So, for instance, when they adapt their entry requirements, when they recognize or integrate alternative assessment methods, and when they consider that their traditional understanding of quality can be broadened and diversified to, for instance, understand that being accessible is also part of the quality that they should strive for. There's other elements like establishing partnerships between educational institutions and organizations that have specialized expertise in issues of disability and accessibility. When organizations are willing to develop a cultural transformation to embrace the disabled experience as a source of artistic innovation and diversity. And of course, when there are policies and legislation that support and funding that support this to happen. So just to sum up, one of the concepts we refer to in the report is the systemic barriers and the fact that the system as it is has very important systemic flaws, and therefore we also need a systemic change which needs to connect legislation, policies, practices, organizational culture, data, and mindsets. And in the report we include a number of concrete recommendations for public authorities at all levels, for higher education institutions, and for performing arts organizations to help that change to happen.
Thank you, Jordi. Thank you, actually, both of you, Conrad and Jordi, for this very clear presentation, brief presentation of the results. We encourage everybody to have a look at the report, send us back your comments. I don't think everything was a surprise for people who have been in this field for a longer time, but once we have a study, things become a fact, not just a perception, not just the lived experience of one or other person, but a fact. And the truth is we can act on facts. So thank you both again. And I think we're going for a 5-minute break, right?
No, we
Not
have
yet?
just another section, and we go for a break.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I
No,
was
it's
running
okay.
too
It's
fast.
okay.
You're
It's
sorry.
okay.
Yes.
It's the
Thank you,
beauty of
Aristide.
being online.
Thank you.
No worries. Thanks again to Conrad and Jordi. Now I'm very delighted to invite the disabled artist Angela Bettoni and Tanya Herart, together with Ben Evans, project director of Euro Beyond Access, to hear consideration from the disabled artist perspective and from the commissioner perspective on the result finding. Hi, Angela, Tanya, and Ben. Welcome again. Hey. So before we start, the conversation, we're gonna ask you to introduce yourself one by one. And I kindly ask you to share your name, where are you based, your pronoun, a short description of your artistic or professional profile, and also to give a short self-audio description of yourself. So we can start with Angela, and then Tanya can follow, and Ben. Okay? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Angela Bettoni, and I'm a 24-year-old female. I identify as disabled with Down syndrome. I'm a performance artist, and writer. I have a fairly long and say dark brown hair. I have olive skin and a big smile. And I'm a half Italian and a half Sri Lankan, but I'm based in Malta.
Thank you, Angela. Tanya.
Hi, my name is Tanya Erhardt. My sign name is three fingers pointing downwards, hovering over my other left hand, which means a three-legged dancer. My pronouns are she, her. I am a crip queer, disability justice, and pleasure activist, as well as dancer, performer, and facilitator teacher. Today I am wearing my brown long hair halfway up to a bun and halfway long down. I have golden earrings and I'm wearing a purple hoodie where it's written on access is solidarity, is disability justice, is love.
And hello, my name is Ben Evans. I am a tall white man in my late 40s with short brown hair and a ginger beard. Today, for this event, I ironed a white shirt, so I thought I would look smart today. I use he, him pronouns. I am a disabled arts manager and the project director of Europe Beyond Access, through which this report was commissioned.
Thank you very much. So my first question is for Angela and Tanya to hear more about the disability perspective. And my question is for you is do you relate your experience as a disabled student or a facilitator in a higher education institution to the result of the report? What are the barriers you experienced in the higher art education institution? I kindly ask Angela to start. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm talking from the perspective of a disabled student and artist. So basically my early experience, I first began with an advanced diploma in performing arts. And then I began a degree in the creative arts. But then in the second year, my college that I was in proposed that I would make it into a degree into the creative arts. Some of the course units in the performing arts, like let's say for dance, for example, was not made accessible to me to use. So the only advantage was that I got to select courses from different degrees. So for example, like photography or creative media or journalism. So in a way, I had a tailored course. I was also lucky to have the entry requirements for the advanced diploma, as I had done my O-levels. But quoting the report, as it says, that many students with learning disabilities, especially those with Down syndrome, wouldn't meet the entry requirements. The second point I would like to make is that one of the main advantages of this particular course that I was in was that I could also access and had the opportunity from the Erasmus Plus fellowships. In fact, I got 4 of them, each of which were 2 to 3 weeks long. I was also able to get professional training and also to build up my network. As the report also says, that networking is also especially important with other professionals and in terms of early professional opportunities in the performing arts. One of the main barriers is getting access to mainstream training. I usually prefer training in the mainstream sphere because I feel like I can grow a lot. Even though the European access are also a part of really, really useful, so different in this circumstance. The regular training I get in Malta is only once a week for 1 to 1.5 hours. So when I do dance classes with a learning graduating groups, it's called Opening Doors Association Malta. But in some months, I do get the chance to train on a more mainstream level. And with that, I'm also able to join the open company classes doing contemporary dance with the National Dance Company of Malta. But again, these classes are not a weekly thing, as they're only there for 1 hour and 50 minutes daily for 1 week per month. So it's not very consistent as much as I would have liked. And I can only join these classes when I'm free. And also, it was a ballet, not sorry, it was mostly contemporary and not a ballet. So in the end, my main training opportunities have been to the Erasmus mobility experiences that I have had, which I have received through my education at my college, and now the European Access Lab Cycles. Personally, I think it's really tough to be a professional artist with a disability, especially if you don't have the constant opportunity to train and improve.
Thank you very much, Angela, for sharing your experience and outlining the barriers, also the opportunity, but with limits and the difficulties to get a constant training, physical, practical training to grow, and which is a very disadvantage for disabled people. I pass the word to Tanya, and if you, I can repeat the question. It's about how you relate yourself with the report and the barriers you experience in your case as a disabled facilitators.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, I've been an disabled crip queer artist for over 10 years, and I'm more in the facilitating role as well currently. And through my experiences, especially also in the higher education, is, for example, that we have heard about access needs. And I want to bring in here my experience with access riders. So access riders are a document that includes access needs, individual access needs that are there to work in an environment, and can also include anti-ableist measurements and to establish those in the community with the people. And my experience recently also was that I have asked as a facilitator the institution to please ask my students to send me an access rider. I have, rarely, I have not gotten any back. And I think throughout the seminar, then it became clear that it's not that there were no needs in the room, but I think the students were also very worried what this information that the access rider will include, where in which hand does it land, or who is the person who gets that information, because they are worried or scared as well that it can be used against them. They still want that diploma, they want that certificate. So ableist systems and structures like the compulsory attendancy, so that they have to be there a certain amount of time, etc., is really also worrying. And we heard also from the report, they struggle a lot. So yeah, in the students, we heard about students with invisible disabilities. That means, in my experience, disabled students are everywhere, but they are invisibilized. And there are a number of reasons for that, especially because, yeah, they might have a fallback on them if they are transparent that they are disabled. They might have not the courage to call themselves disabled, etc. So then as well, struggle with temporary accommodations instead of building sustainable structures. Students, when I came in, I established a rest and retreat space within the dance studio, And students, people got really worried, when I'm gone, this will be gone as well. So it's that struggle with, okay, I as a disabled facilitator come in, want to establish a kind of culture and practices, but when I'm gone, that's it. Yeah, systemic ableism. I realized that in institutions, there are people who are really wanting to change some things, teachers, facilitators, professors, but they are so tied with specific, that they have to do it in a certain way because of institutions, how to say, yeah, whatever they need to do, for example, that attendance, they need to make that list and give it back. So what also comes in here is that they feel ashamed. They are within students and institutions and are ashamed of that. There's a lot of emotion actually in there as well. And I think we need to acknowledge that and also acknowledge the emotional labor that disabled students have to do within those settings more. Yeah, as a disabled facilitator, I often don't have access to staff rooms, which are kitchens, offices, libraries, etc. And we heard that in the report that only, yeah, 27%, for example, have free building access. And for me as a wheelchair user, where are the toilets? They might be on the opposite side. I'm like, okay, what do I do? When I have to go to the toilet during the class, etc. So also I would bring in, for example, an assistant. And what we also heard, their access budget is very limited. So we don't have the budget that it needs, for example, to bring an assistant in. And there it comes down to the goodwill of other staff members, of even students, etc., etc. Yeah, I think I stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for your rich contribution and also to highlight the rigidity of the structure in the house, in the educational art educational system, which is one of the biggest systemic barriers that and creates a lot of friction and frustrations. I pass the word to Ben Evans now, and I have a specific question for him, for you. What is the EBA response to the report? So just to hear more about your perspective as programmers and commissioners.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's worth just mentioning why, well, asking the question, why has Europe Beyond Access commissioned this report? We're not cultural, we're not arts education providers, but we are mainstream cultural institutions. And as we've said, we have jobs and opportunities for deaf and disabled artists, but our experience is that artists are not given the tools and skills by the cultural education sector at the moment. So we are the market. And as an industry, it feels important to communicate to training institutions the needs of our industry and to say that they're not being met currently. And this, I think it's really important to say that exclusion in the performing arts isn't just an academic issue because it shapes who gets to create and whose stories are told and what aesthetics dominate our stages. There's so much to say about this report, and I'm so grateful to On the Move and Conrad and Geordie for the work. But perhaps 5 key reflections. Firstly, you can't read this report without being deeply troubled by the experiences reported by students. They really dominate my reading of the report. Students refused entry, struggling with courses, dropping out early, or experiencing very difficult circumstances, burnout, and psychological breakdown. Secondly, that there is exciting work being done by some educational institutions that are welcoming disabled students and more diverse groups of teachers and trainers. And in particular, they note the artistic value of this work, that artists with disabilities are contributing to an enriching of artistic practice. And that's what we recognize as Europe Beyond Access, as mainstream professional arts organizations. So we note some of the hugely important artistic contributions being made by disabled artists to the development of the art forms. And we know that without disabled students and trainers, cultural education is impoverished. I think thirdly, as was referred to by Conrad, it relates to the curriculum or perhaps even the philosophy of the training itself. And the report problematizes this idea of the neutral body, this idea that in theatre or dance training, the work of the training institution was to create neutral graduates without any personal characteristics that could morph into any role or dance vocabulary, bringing nothing of yourself to that role. So, as we as EBA, as representatives of the cultural sector, I'm noticing that we have an appetite for artists and performance that do have characteristics, histories, and specificities. And this idea of training the neutral body feels outdated. I certainly know it was something that was already being questioned in the three drama schools where I trained in London, Moscow, and Madrid in the late 90s. Fourthly, something that Angela just mentioned here, and Angela, you talked about the value of Erasmus Plus to you. The report notes that 20% of graduates have moved countries to find accessible training. So it just shows the inaccessibility in certain countries. And then finally, just to say, just to underline the divide that the report reveals between what education institutions say they do and how accessible they really are. And for me, two statistics stand out that 75% of institutions claim that applicants and students have the possibility to communicate their access needs. And yet, speaking to graduates, only 17% had been asked about that. So it just feels to me that there's a big divide.
Thank you a lot, Ben, for sharing this point. And I want to outline one which is very important to me that the educational art institute are missing their duty to train disabled artists in an accessible way. And the market is ready. There is market. There are a lot of disabled, wonderful, brilliant disabled artists among us. So this I wanted to highlight even more. We just go to the last question and I'm gonna involve all of you. And it's I ask you to respond briefly because we are a bit running now, and it's about recommendation you would give to higher education institution. I know there might be many, but I ask you to outline at least one important for you. We can start with Angela, if you like.
So I have only 4 points, but I'm going to make them really quick. So the report talks about having alternative training pathways. I think that that would be an importance or more openness to this idea to have more collaborations between academic institutions. Like for example, let's say dance companies, for example, and to also be willing to change the assessment criteria to make sure that they are tailored to each individual. As the report also says, there is a need for more recognition that diversity within a learning space can be enriching for everyone and can benefit everyone as well. And lastly, and most importantly, I think it's about providing the support that is needed by the students, as this seems to be uncommon for students who have intellectual disabilities. So this comes to the argument of equality versus equity.
Thank you so much. Tanya, Ben, adding in the pod.
Adding to the pot, I would throw in, yes, it needs a specific access advisor for on institutions, which means that could be a mentor who the students can approach to talk about their access needs, to work on the access rider, because there's also the thing, how can a student know what their access needs are when they're just starting off? When I started off, I did have no idea what I need. Like I needed to go into the studio and find out. So we need loops of checking in with each other, to work on it together, to advise, etc., etc. So access advisor. And I would bring in here also the aesthetics of access. This is a new curriculum, I think, should be established that centers access as an aesthetics. And that includes, for example, also an understanding of crib time, an understanding of how it is to work interdependently, and understanding of, different access needs. And for example, creative audio description, deaf performances, how to also work with different access dramaturgies for audiences. Because I think this is also not being talked about too much in institutions yet. But from an access-centered perspective, I also care for my audience in a collective understanding. And so I think to bring that more in and to learn creative things like that, and to work access centered is something that is super exciting for me. And I think the institutions could look into establish that and bring in different perspectives of disability and the aesthetics of access.
Thank you again, Daniel. Ben.
Yeah, I will just limit my recommendations to two today. Um, the first is work in partnership, and you don't have to do this alone. There are many experts out there in the professional field. That is certainly what we've learnt as mainstream cultural institutions. And the report actually explores the value of alternative education paths, including the excellent training carried out by many of the specialist disability arts organizations throughout Europe. But as Conrad said, the report also talks about the limitations of the training, especially when it comes to professionalization. But there are these expert organizations across Europe, and there are already some wonderful partnerships between expert organizations and mainstream arts training organizations. And just three examples from here in the UK. Maybe we'll hear about it in a bit, but Stopgap Dance Company, working with the Northern School of Contemporary Dance, as a partnership to look at Northern School's program. There's an amazing partnership between deaf theatre company Solar Bear in Scotland with the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, establishing a BA in performance for deaf and hard of hearing actors. So a whole BA delivered through sign language. And a partnership in London between Access All Areas, which is a specialist company, a specialist company of learning disabled actors, developing with Central School of Speech and Drama, one of the main drama schools in London, a diploma specifically for learning disabled adults. So this relationship between expert companies and mainstream institutions feels like a really exciting approach. And finally, I just wanted to say I'm just reflecting on the death of a brilliant actress, Yvonne Brewster, who died last month, a Black British actress, and who was the first Black woman to attend a drama school in the UK. And she talked often about having been rejected from drama school after drama school because they told her that there would be no jobs for her. And that they couldn't train her because she would have no jobs. And she persuaded one drama school to let her in and told them that her career afterwards was her problem, but they should give her the training. Well, Yvonne Brewster graduated. She went on to found the UK's leading Black British theatre company, Tallowa Theatre Company, and to work throughout a rich career in leading theatres and a leading role in television. So I guess I'm saying that drama schools now need to consider the sector and how it will be in the future, and not what they think it is right at the moment.
Thank you again. Thank you a lot, Ben. And I want to outline that education is a right, so everybody should be have this right, no exclusion. Beside the consideration about the market, it's a right, and we should have this right. That's it. But now I thank you again and it was a pleasure having you here and hear about your perspective. A very good point, brilliant conversation. Thank you so much, all of you. We have 5 minutes break. We're gonna meet again in at 12:15, I guess. So after the break, we're gonna continue with insight from representative of the European Commission and reflection from alternative training leaders and educational art institutions representative. See you in a short while. Grab tea, drink. See you later.
So we are back after a short break. I hope you're still with us. As many things resonated with me in this first part of today's event. But perhaps one thing I would like to highlight at this point, and it has to do very much with our experience from the cultural sector as well, is that we truly need to be proactive and ask people what their specific access needs are. We shouldn't expect people to, take this initiative. They're not always comfortable or they don't feel welcome to do it. So a sign must come from the organizations, be it cultural, educational, etc. So a few days ago, we had the opportunity to talk to Gosia Schlendek, who comes from the Creative Europe unit of the European Commission, and we discussed with her the report's implications to cultural policy. So let's see what she had to say to us. Gosia Schlendek, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. It's a very important day for all of us, and this report is is not only confirming some things we knew, but essentially it brings new things to us. So perhaps my first question would be, what did you learn something new reading the report?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation for the Creative Europe to be represented in this exchange. What I learned from the report is that actually at all stages we are facing the same challenges. And the first one would be the lack of precise data. And let me explain. We are working in Creative Europe, especially in the mobility scheme Culture Moves Europe with artists with disability, and we are fighting to have precise numbers or at least some indications about how many artists with disabilities are practicing or are in the sectors, all the sectors, not only performing arts in the EU, or even within Creative Europe countries. And we do not have this data. We have only data from Eurostat stating about the numbers about the general population, but we don't know how many of those are artists. And of course, this study brings additional information that somehow we felt, we experienced this, but now we have the confirmation that these art schools do not have those numbers either. So for a policy making for actions, it's very difficult because we cannot establish targets. We don't know how many we should aim to have participants in our actions, in our projects, because we don't have this starting point, the number of how many artists are leaving schools, artistic schools.
Yeah. That's true. And yeah, it's very relevant, very connected to the report and access to artistic schools. But don't you think at the same time that even before we have the data, we know that these people exist. We know informally sometimes that there are deaf and disabled artists in Europe, in different countries. Do you think that we'll be able to get this data before we create access conditions for the people to feel more safe even in showing up and saying, I want to study to be an actor, a singer, a dancer, whatever?
I think
maybe my question is, don't you think these are parallel issues? Yes, we need the data. At the same time, we need to be working on access conditions.
I think they are completing, that they can be indeed be done in parallel. On one side, there are cultural organizations. Some may dispose of fraction data from their sectors, from their country. This is definitely something that could be piled up to have a more detailed vision of this sector. And also within Culture Moves Europe, we are only at the beginning of the action. So it's been 2.5 years that we are implementing this action. Of course, at some point we will have data, we'll be able to have numbers to reach a scale, and we do not stop our efforts before we have numbers. So we don't have targets, but we do some efforts to increase the numbers, even though we don't know how much we should go in those efforts in specific countries or in specific sectors. We have no clear ideas, but indeed those actions can be done in parallel.
Great. Was there a surprise for you in this report? Any pleasant or unpleasant surprise?
Maybe not surprise, but something that I found as a kind of very pleasant takeaway, promising one, is that the examples from the artistic school that started making efforts shows that there is a way, and indeed, I mean, especially the example of University of Arts of Evora and the Polish theater school in Warsaw. They show that it's a change of mindset that starts the progress, and this is also something that we observed in Culture Moves Europe, in Creative Europe in general. So I think this is very promising, and also the fact that you said that from the survey, 86% of those schools, they realized that there is a need to make more efforts to increase accessibility, and I think this recognition is again, this is the starting point for to make some changes, introduce some measures.
Indeed, and it's the space where our efforts regarding education and culture, this is where we come together, and we understand that our efforts are common, are shared. Based on the results and especially on the recommendations this report brings for EU institutions, where and how do you see Creative Europe's role?
Well, this is very timely for two reasons, this discussion and the studies, because that we are now in the final years of the Creative Europe. So, of course, inclusion is at the very heart of our preoccupations within Creative Europe, and we'll continue our efforts. I spoke already about Culture Moves Europe, but also in general actions of the Creative Europe in cooperation projects. And we'll, of course, continue those efforts now until the end of the project. And I can tell you that, for example, again, let me use the example of Culture Moves Europe. We have developed this system of accessibility support for participants with disabilities. And now in October, we have reviewed the system for the new series of the calls. We have simplified and made them more relevant based on the feedback from the grantees. And this is something that we are doing it's a permanent exercise for us. And this is also an information that you included in the study, the importance of working with the organization who have expertise about the needs of artists with disability. And this is something, of course, we didn't have. We are specialists in cultural projects, but not necessarily specifically on this. And we worked with a specialized organization. We work with Disability Cluster. We work with an organization called Podium, who very much helped us in directing. So this is the exercise we are continuing, but short term. And then like a longer term perspective, of course, we are starting working on the new Creative Europe that will be part of the Agora EU program. And we will continue our efforts, but we will also increase accessibility within the program. And our guiding now strategic document adopted a few weeks ago by the Commission is, of course, the Cultural Compass for Europe that goes even further. It's more explicit, and it gives us, of course, direction. And the compass states, let me cite that we'll commit to enhancing inclusive access to culture, paying particular attention to the cultural rights of persons with disabilities. And I think with this guiding principle, we will be able to go even further with this exercise. And also, this is why I was saying that your report is very timely, because this will feed also the discussion. Compass, it's not only about Creative Europe. Compass is about giving direction to mainstreaming culture in all policy areas. So this is this will be very useful for all sectors, I think.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear this. We keep learning and we keep building. That's how it should be. Thank you so much, Gosha, for being with us today and for giving us your feedback on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So this is what Gosha Schlendek had to share with us. And allow me to, I'm sorry, I don't have my camera on, but here I am. So this is what Gosha Schlendek had to share with us, and allow me to highlight the need for all of us, being policymakers, educational organizations, cultural organizations, to prioritize access and inclusion, to look for specialized support and expertise, and also that we shouldn't be waiting for the data first and then to act. We actually have the capacity to act now, and then the data will come as well. These are two things that, you know, can move on and be developed in parallel. So in our next panel, we'll have the opportunity to talk also with three colleagues who work with education, professional training in the arts. And I invite Agata, Laura, and David to join us. Let me remind you that one of our speakers will speak in Spanish. So if you need translation, please go down to the globe icon and choose English. Thank you for accepting the invitation to be with us today. It's a pleasure. May I please ask you to present yourselves first, your name, profession, institution, your pronouns, and a brief self-description. Thank you. Agata, maybe you could go first.
Hello, everyone. My name is Agata Adamiecka-Sitek, and I'm a professor and theater researcher at Theater Academy in Warsaw. And I was first in the history students' ombudsperson in this institution. I'm a white woman with brown wavy hair. I'm wearing a burgundy sweater today, and my pronouns are she, her.
Thank you, Agata. David, would you be next?
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hello,
Me
good afternoon.
llamo David
My
Ojeda.
name is David
Soy
Ojeda.
profesor de
I'm
dirección
a
escénica
professor
en la Real Escuela Superior
of
de Arte Dramático de
playwrights
Madrid.
at the National School
Además de
for
ser el
Drama
jefe de
in Madrid,
departamento
apart from being the
de
head of the
promoción y
department
desarrollo
of
en la Real
for the
Escuela Superior
promotion
de
and
Arte Dramático de
development
Madrid.
of the Royal
Soy
Higher
una persona
Academy
de
of
tez
Drama
blanca,
in Madrid.
tengo
I'm a
57
white man.
años,
I'm 57
el
years
pelo
old.
entrado en canas y una barba
I
incipiente
have grey
también,
hair,
un tanto con canas,
a beard,
y de complexión
also
gruesa.
grey.
Thank you, David. Laura.
Hello,
Hello.
I'm Laura Jones. My pronouns are she, her, and I am co-artistic director of Stopgap Dance Company, which is an inclusive dance company based in the UK. Within the co-artistic directorship, my focus is on talent development, creative learning, and advocacy. I am a white female with brown wavy hair, and actually very similar to Agata, brown wavy hair, and I'm also wearing a burgundy jumper. And I identify as neurodivergent, and I have lived experience of disability as a wheelchair user.
Thank you so much, all three of you. So we will be discussing formal and informal training paths. And the idea is that first each one of you answers some questions, and then we have hopefully enough time for a discussion among the four of us. So Agata, maybe I could start with you first. Your school, the National Academy of Dramatic Art in Warsaw, it is referenced in the report. Four brief questions, brief on my behalf, and then you. What made your university invest in access? how did you begin building an organizational culture that values access? What kind of difficulties did you find on the way, and what kind of benefits you see in this approach? Thank you.
So, yeah, I come from pretty traditional drama school, a place which is shaped mostly by long-standing artistic conventions. And I would like to be clear from the beginning, we are only at the start of the journey toward real accessibility. But I believe thanks to actions we took in the last 2-3 years, our leadership and large part of our community have understood how important this work is and how creatively transformative it can be for all of us. So what made us invest in access? Being honest, it began with a legal obligation. Yes, Polish public universities were required to implement accessibility measures, so the law pushed us to act. But I must underline that our government required this implementation, but did not give us any budget for this. But if you wanted to obtain any public grants, we had to prove we care for access. And with this process of establishing procedures and making necessary adjustments, we started a real inner conversation. We organized workshops, conferences, and it led us to a crucial recognition. Accessibility is not a favor. It's a matter of basic rights for all of us, not just artists and people with disabilities. The report demonstrates clearly that when access to artistic education is denied, an entire community loses opportunities, representation, and recognition. And the report names this a vicious circle of exclusion, and we recognize ourselves in this description, even if we did not use this particular phrase. So how did we begin? The first step was reframing accessibility as a rights-based commitment. We appointed a rector's representative for accessibility, which in our academy is a full-time job served by a very competent person. Her task is not only to assist students, employees, and candidates with their special needs and adjustments, but also to secure grants, propose programs and workshops, and thereby moderate a debate and ensure the issue of access is always present. We introduced transparent procedures, so the adaptations are rights, not favors. But documents do not change culture, people do. So, and actually with line what the report recommends, we looked for external expertise and alliances. A crucial partner for us has been and still is Center for Inclusive Art, one of the most important Polish NGO developing knowledge, method, and artistic practice in the field of inclusive arts. Their experience helped us start building a shared vocabulary, which is very important. Challenge our assumptions and understand artistic accessibility not as an add-on, but as a creative resource. Now, what was most difficult in this, and still is in this process, in my opinion, the biggest challenge is the mental structure of theater training. Actually, we all were trained in the paradigm where the actor's body must be universal, neutral, endlessly adaptable. And this leaves very little space for diversity. And even though we work in the beautiful 19th century buildings, I often say it's still easier to change 19th century architecture to make it accessible than 19th century mental architecture of theater training. The assumptions and the hidden curriculum that shape how we think about the body. Architecture is slow and expensive to change, but mental structures can be even more resistant. Now, benefits. Well, there are some benefits already. We are too early in the process to claim major changes in artistic training, I have to admit. But what we have gained is a new perspective, a shift in the way we think about pedagogy. We have begun understood that adapting method to different body minds, it's not a threat to artistic standard. It is an invitation to creativity. This is something we will now try to introduce slowly and thoughtfully. At the same time, we have already seen an important change in the institutional atmosphere. Students feel safer. Conversation about injury, illness, neurodivergence, and chronic conditions are no longer taboo. And as the report shows, such as safety actually enables artistic risk-taking, not the opposite. For me personally, the most important cultural shift is moving away from the binary opposition able, disabled, toward a continuum of human experience. Full ability is not a stable norm. It is a temporary state. Every one of us will experience disability in one form or another because of illness, accidents, aging. So the changes we are making are not for a small group. They serve all of us. This is exactly what the report makes visible. Accessibility is not a technical task. It is a cultural and artistic transformation. And I think in Theatre Academy in Warsaw, we really start acknowledge this. Thanks.
This is great, Agata. Thank you. And you brought up an issue that was in my mind that as I was listening to our colleagues before. Mental structure can be more resistant than architecture, actually, but it's less expensive to change. And we could start from there. We should start from there, actually.
It's less expensive, but it's more difficult.
More difficult. Thank you. And also, yeah, to highlight that we are talking about rights and not favors. So we'll move on from Poland to Spain and to Madrid. David is with us. David, I think the work that has been undertaken by your school, the Real Escuela Superior de Arte Dramático, is very relevant, and it is mentioned also in the report. Would you like to briefly take us through the process of inclusive education in your school, and specifically in what relates to the Faculty of Stage Direction and Dramaturgy?
Bueno, pues fundamentalmente me ocupo
Mainly, I am in charge of training in accessible design as a concept for the students in stage direction. That features how accessible design for the creation of shows is more increases participation, just as the design of light, scenography, and the scenic concept, and it occupies the measures of self-description, subtitling, accessible programs, and utilization of technology such as amplified sound, vibratory platform, and stages to develop the process of accessibility to people with intellectual or other disabilities. So this training is conducted in subjects in which I teach in stage direction, and it allows the students to create a new space for the shows. In this case, students also voluntarily carries out voluntary designs of samples of their scenic work. And not all of these are accessible, but we have technology to make accessible shows. That is, we enhance the work of design as well as the participation of people with disabilities as a public. And students carry out the tutorized design of the scripts for the show, the and subtitling when necessary for people with different disabilities, as well as the use of technologies with amplified sound, among others. All this is done at educational didactic level, and the end of master studies are also include the participation of disabled students, and this is in cooperation with other projects of scenic cooperation. This is a part of this training, and in the area of the development that I conduct, we are managing accessibility meetings like the one held last October 9th, together with Accessible Europe, the ONCE Foundation, which is a large foundation for for visually disabled persons, and the Association of Universal Accessibility Professionals of Spain, with whom we are cooperating. We also cooperate with institutions such as CECIA, Spanish Center of Audio Description and Subtitling, and we have organized two meetings to establish the procedure of the measures for accessibility to the development of accessible stages. And in 2024, we held a meeting explaining the current status of the implementation in Spain of a royal decree 1993, which requires the fulfillment in any cultural or artistic training space of accessibility measures attending to the needs of the public, such as a number of improvements in communication and physical spaces. That royal decree is, in fact, what gives us our institution, which is almost 2 centuries old. It requires us to comply with the needs of participation of people with disability as students. At present, we have 3 such students in different courses. And we have also had people with auditive disability who are professionals of the performing arts. And every year we've had the participation of people who want to access these higher studies, and we're giving them adapted tests, access tests with different requirements and different programs and software to facilitate communication and transmission of the admission test. We also conduct different cooperations with institutions and to give coverage to the participation of people with disabilities as public. And throughout history, we have conducted a number of functions from as a number of meetings together with the National Association of Arts and Disabilities in 2012 and 2014. We also made a master for scenic art or performing arts for people with disabilities, which was not implemented despite being approved. And RESAC, my institution, and the Dance Conservatory of the Madrid, and this was approved by the Ministry of Education, but was not implemented due to financial difficulties, but it was approved. And now to end, we have the participation of a professional who comes from the psychology area to work as a guidance tutor in the educational process and to advise us in emotional welfare of students and teachers, as well as horizontal measures to promote personal attention. So, as an educational center, we are following what was implemented by the Culture Ministry with the Cultural Rights Plan, which invites all artistic institutions of higher education, as well as exhibition spaces, to involve the underprivileged groups. My department, the department I lead, the promotion of development, follows the line of these ideas of this national cultural rights plan, and this is what I can summarize.
Yeah, well, that to my knowledge is very rare for an artistic school to discuss these issues, to to integrate them in the curriculum. That's really amazing. Can I quickly ask you to tell us, how did this start in your school? Was it because of the law? It's more or less the question I asked Agatha as well.
No, empezó a partir de mi labor artística
Well,
profesional.
it started on the basis of the observatory of professional artistic activities. So, since I arrived here in 2011, I worked hand in hand with the various teams, adapting the access examinations for people with disabilities, and this was a process, a regulated process. In also, in 5 years, we participated in the meetings on inclusion organized by the National Institute of Scenic Arts of the Ministry of Culture, and this was possible as an institution to improve accessibility at a national level. And in this sense, through my work, it was possible. My almost 15 years as a teacher, we were able to pay special attention to people with disabilities who every year have these access studies, these access exams, if necessary, with the interpreter for sign language, and with different facilities or requirements. At present, we are modifying the physical spaces of the building in which we work, because the architectural report approved in 1990, and since then, the renewal of physical spaces in Spain since 1992, we are embarking on reforms of the building. So we have in the ground floor, we have the main two auditoriums, and we are modifying all spaces, including restrooms, also implementing tactile signage. As we also have a Navi lens system, which is internationally known because it enables people with visual disability to communicate through their mobile device with a 360 plan for audio descriptive information. So a blind person can access the entire community services as a public mainly, and as well as access to accessible functions. We hope
many here, but then also we'll have the recording and we can share it widely. So your views, all three of you, can be more widely known. Thank you, David. I move on to Laura now, co-artistic director of StopGap. And StopGap is a partner of Northern School of Contemporary Dance. The report also mentions the importance of this kind of partnerships. So would you like, Laura, to comment on two specific findings of the report? The fact that alternative paths are evaluated by students as more accessible, but at the same time, they feel that they might be giving them less professional opportunities. Tell us a bit about how your collaboration with the Northern School of Contemporary Dance started, who took the initiative, why, and then also what are the strong points you see in this partnership and the benefits that could be useful for other organizations as well.
Yeah. So at Stopgap, as an inclusive dance company who work with creative team, a diverse creative team, we use dance as a movement for change. We really value the disabled art, the value that disabled artists bring to a creative process. So we're very proud to be able to offer an alternative training program, and that we've been very successful with that, in that we've had disabled dancers who have come through our youth programs and our community programs and trained with us along the way, and then have become professional dancers within the company, choreographers and leaders. However, we really acknowledge that we have a limited capacity for this. Yes, we do have a lot of expertise within the area, but we are a touring company. We create productions to tour. We have a very extensive creative learning and outreach program, teacher training, and also advocacy work. So our capacity to train disabled dancers, whilst we have the skills, we have a limited capacity. And we also really want to acknowledge that inclusion isn't just the job of the specialist few. It is everybody's responsibility to work towards inclusion and to make training accessible and to create opportunities so young disabled dancers can train on a par with their non-disabled peers and can receive appropriate and adequate and accessible training to, as the research spoke about, to then have those skills to then go into the profession. And so that's why our partnership with Northern School of Contemporary Dance is so important to us. It brings that ability to bring our experience and of working with and training disabled dancers with the reach and the value that training at a professional higher education conservatoire has. So it started quite organically. We already had a number of connections with the school that we worked together on various things, including we had their professional placement students. We're part of that program. So it was kind of there was already communication happening there. But there was a particular thing that kind of grew the partnership, was from an opportunity where they had a disabled student and were asking for support, and both us at Stopgap and Northern School of Contemporary Dance took that opportunity rather than seeing it as this is an individual situation and we will work together to, quotes, find a solution. We actually took that as a broader opportunity to really commit to working together to look at the broader access of the whole school. And so that's through various things. It's included so far delivering training to the staff, some opportunities for the students, including careers development opportunities, supporting them, looking at their policies and creating access, finding ways to make their policies more accessible. And it's still a relatively new partnership, so we're still building our strategy, and we're discovering that as we're working together, and the more we do, the more we discover that we want to do. So it's definitely building. I think in terms of strengths and things to take away, I think that a really key thing is to remember that yes, access is everyone's responsibility, but also to think that it's not a burden. It shouldn't be considered as a burden, but actually an opportunity, that by creating access, you can unlock new experiences, opportunities, and to revitalize, within the training process, revitalize that, and it will have much wider benefits than access. It will have a wide-ranging benefits. I think also don't let fear stop you. It's really important to make a start wherever you are within your journey of access. Make a start and try and make some progress. There is, as we've heard, there's lots of pockets of excellent work happening. So create partnerships, speak to people, and make sure that within those conversations, people with lived experience of disability are involved within those conversations. And it can feel really big and overwhelming. As I said, there's lots of things that we're discovering we want to do. But again, don't let that kind of fear put you off. You've got to start somewhere. So start with the things that are achievable, and then that can kind of build a momentum.
Great, thank you, Laura. I think one of the things you mentioned, and it is also in the report, I would like to highlight it, that very often we see educational and cultural organizations taking some steps to accommodate the specific needs of one individual. And then quite often, from our experience, even this experience doesn't become knowledge, so that the next person that comes in, we don't need to go back to zero and ask what you need, etc. Although each individual is an individual, but that basic learning, it doesn't stay with us. So it is important, yes, to move away from accommodating the needs of an individual and to bring in systemic change. Thank you so much. We're almost reaching the end of our time, so I was thinking of asking also Agata and David to do something similar to what Laura did for us. One important recommendation that you would give to other higher education artistic schools. Just one.
Oh, difficult.
But we didn't rehearse that.
Yes, it's alliances. Look for organization with expertise and cooperate with them. It can change really a lot. That's mine.
Very important. Thank you, Agata. David?
Fundamentalmente que la enseñanza de las
Mainly that the teaching of performance arts, it's a live curriculum, and that we are ongoing in an ongoing manner, making specific adaptations for any person. The methodologies and systems we have learned with this neutral education are universal and therefore enabling for anybody. If we use enabling as a concept, now removing the prejudice of the professionals teaching in this center to accept diversity in bodies, like methodologies such as Michael Chekhov, Matthias Alexander, and other methodologies have always enhanced the adaptation of unsuspected improvements so that anybody can study scenic arts, just as in dance territories. I know the work of Laura. They have an excellent company in the UK and European level. There are great professional projects that are recognized as professional quality artists and as references in many skills. And even so, the higher education centers are paradoxically against this renewal of live arts.
Thank you, David, for what you shared with us, for the work you're developing that is inspiring us. And I would like to invite once again my colleague Aristide to join us so that we can close this very important event. Before I pass the word to Aristide, just to remind you that you will be able to find this report on the EuroBeyondAccess.com website, where you will also find the executive summaries translated in more languages, as well as the audio recordings of these executive summaries. So Aristide, back to you. What did you think?
I think that I was very inspired by all the contribution, and I still think that I think that there are still countless barriers preventing deaf and disabled people from fulfilling their right and desire to have formal and fully accessible education. Too few are the programs and institutes that are accessible across Europe, even if we have excellent example and here in the room, and I'm very glad to hear about that. But as shown by the report, the lack of accessibility is in contrast with the growing demand of deaf and disabled people who want to study art. It's in contrast with the growing demand and interest from programs of the art sector who desire to program, support, co-produce deaf and disabled artists, and also it contradicts the constantly growing number of inclusive dance art companies, independent deaf and disabled artists, artists without disability who look for deaf and disabled artists to work with. So the world is changing and is asking the educational art system to change. And what I think is that disability is usually perceived as a lack, but as shown by the report, it's the art educational system that is lacking flexibility, knowledge, awareness, and tool to open their program to deaf and disabled people. And this lack creates a big disadvantages for deaf and disabled artists in getting into the professional art sector, on top of the systemic barriers every day we experience. And also I've noticed that there are it's a great and a brilliant, vibrant amount of knowledge, approaches, practices, method about access and aesthetics of disabled and deaf artists have who are shared cultural heritage that must be fully incorporated into university and higher educational institution. These practices would allow deaf and disabled students to develop fully their creative and artistic potential within the training time, instead of asking them to adapt or step aside or stay out. And the report clearly provides like a precise picture of this reality of injustice. And faced with this evidence, the leadership roles of educational artist system, institutions, politicians, and teacher cannot choose to ignore it. I think they need to start with the change. And it's a simple choice. Like somebody says, you can start with a mental setup to review, at least. It's a beginning and things will follow up, like also Laura says. So say yes to start the change, and the change will not happen suddenly, but probably through a step-by-step process that will require dedication, constancy, time, resources, and also passion. But the first thing we need to do is to say yes now, I think. And last thing is that I want to say that disability has shown by many brilliant, vibrant, rich deaf and disabled artists within more than a couple of decades give birth to beautiful pieces of art that make the art sector progress, and that everybody should be able to see and assist that. So barriers in the educational arts sector, as well as barriers in the whole arts sector, prevent disabled beauty from blossoming. So let's start the change and spread the disabled beauty, please.
Aristide, that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is a good opportunity to thank Europe Beyond Access, to thank Skånes Dansteater for commissioning the report, to thank On the Move, to thank all the technical support for this event, as well as the international sign and sign language interpreters, to thank all our dear guests, not only for being here with us today, but because of the work they do. To thank all the people who joined, whom we are sure they are going to move on and make the change happen. And I would like maybe to conclude with what was written on Tanya's jumper. Access is solidarity, is disability justice, is love. Thank you all so, so much.